This morning, officials of the World Bank's International Finance Corporation visited the offices of Creditinfo here in Jamaica to assess the implementation of credit bureaus in the country. Now, Creditinfo is the first institution to be licensed by the central bank, the BOJ, to operate a full-service credit bureau. And credit bureaus basically gives lenders information to better assess the credit worthiness of borrowers. It also allows banks to make loan decisions easier and reduce the waiting time for banks to make a decision on loan offers. Now, to tell us more about the visit of the World Bank and the utility of credit reporting, we're joined by the CEO of Creditinfo, Megan Deane. Glad to talk to you on this program once again, Megan Deane.
Glad to talk to you too, Dennis. Thank you for having me. I hope I can infuse a little bit of enthusiasm post your angst over the Gunners win.
I had no angst. I wanted a draw, but my victory, left me on cloud 9. Yeah.
Anyway, happy to help share with your listeners.
No problem. Now, Megan, one of the things that I wanted to do in this conversation was to draw attention to the fact that we're really, in terms of an economy and a financial sector, more specifically, are modernizing rapidly, even though we've always been modernizing. And one of the natural next steps is credit reporting and credit information. Before we look at what the World Bank is doing now, give us a little bit of the importance of credit reporting.
Well, credit bureaus and credit reporting is considered to be an absolute basic part of the financial infrastructure of a country. Because the recognition has been made internationally that persons who have access to information in terms of a credit history of an individual not only are able to make better decisions, they make quicker decisions, and it also facilitates access to credit by persons who may not have the kind of security collateral to offer as may be required if people didn't have an understanding about how they treat with their responsibilities. So the intention is for it to be a win-win situation in terms of allowing access to information and reliable, accurate information to be able to make the decisions that are in the interest of both parties.
So in terms of looking, I mean, we hear the ads in America all the time, free credit score this, and all those funny commercials about improving your credit worthiness, etc. And basically, you're saying that's what we're bringing in Jamaica with credit bureaus, but don't you have to get several institutions on board as your client, basically, then, so that you're providing information to a pool of people, or they're drawing information from you, should I say?
All right. Well, let me just put it in context. We now operate in a formalized credit reporting environment with the passage of the Credit Reporting Act in 2010.
Yes.
And Creditinfo applied for and got a license. Credit bureaus now have to be licensed. Before the promulgation of the Act, we did have companies that were collecting information, but there was no regulation around it, no determination about the requirements for accuracy, and there was no limitation on who they could go to and where they could go, and the consumer had no protection under that non-formalized regime. Since 2010, and with the licensing of the bureaus in 2012, all of that has changed. So the legislation says who can provide credit information to a bureau, the conditions under which they have to ensure accuracy and reliability of the information. It also indicates who can pull information from a bureau, which may not be done without the consent in writing of the subject of that credit report.
Okay.
And then it also indicates what it is to be used for. There's a whole complaints procedure for the consumer if there's inaccurate information in their report, and it really tries to, anticipate some of the challenges, make sure they're met, and also provide guidelines for operation of the bureaus and the credit information providers. Now, these credit information providers can be any financial institution that is extending credit, giving loans, credit cards, those kinds of things. So banks, building societies, credit unions, microfinance institutions, the hire purchase companies, the development banks, NHT, Students Loan Bureau. All of these institutions are allowed under the legislation to provide credit information. So what we have done since we have gotten our license is to go out and engage these various institutions on the capabilities of our credit bureau system, because it is a free market. There is another licensed credit bureau, and we try to bring these institutions on board to provide us with their credit information. Since we have been licensed, we have now about 42 institutions that have signed with us, including
42.
all of the major institutions, and they're at various stages of transferring their information to our database. But certainly, both of the major banks, their data is already in NCB, BNS, and pretty much they cover most of the island, whether somebody usually will have a credit card at the very least with them. So we have almost 600,000 records now between those two institutions, and we have data already from another 10 in. So we have about 12 institutions live, and we're working with the other 30 odd, and we're continuing to sign to bring their data in.
So if, for example, so if my technical operator, Andrew Anderson, took a loan from BNS to buy a car 3 years ago, and he subsequently paid that off, that would be reflected in your data. If he goes now to take something on hire purchase, they just check up the information, and that comes through to them that he has good credit, so to speak, as they say in America. He got good credit.
It assumes that he paid it off, and he paid it off in agreement with what he and BNS had arranged. Then that history will definitely be in the database, because we can collect up to 7 years of history. And similarly,
if my producer Cecil Toms didn't do so well with one loan facility that he took out, maybe that might be reflected then in his score. You actually produce a score?
It would be reflected. We have started producing scores since November of last year, because we went live in July, and after 4 months of consistent data from any entity, it will start to generate, the system will start to generate a score based on the information that is being provided. So it depends how long the institution with which any of your listeners has been exposed has been in our system. Then they would see their scores 4 months after that particular entity starts to provide us with information.
What does a good credit score sound like from you, that is? Because, I mean, I've seen numbers on cable television that I don't necessarily understand, but what does a good credit score sound like as opposed to a bad one?
Well, we don't like to talk about good and bad in terms of the credit industry. There is a range of score, and it goes from 250 in our case up to 900, because we decided to follow the FICO score range, which is done in the United States, simply because there's so much exposure to cable, and as you have rightly said, most persons have heard the ads about freecreditreport.com and your credit score and getting all the comparative scores. So obviously, the lower down the scale that you are, it means that your probability of payment becomes less. And it may be for a number of reasons. It may be because you are overexposed in credit. It may be because the credit responsibilities that you've had in the past, you have not handled them as well as maybe you had intended to when you started. I'm going to start out with the premise that everyone has good intent when they take out a facility. But things happen. You know, you lose your job, you lose a spouse or something, and life intervenes. So, but I don't like to talk about good and bad because it depends on the risk tolerance of the new institution that you're going to. There are some institutions that will focus on persons at the lower end of the scale. One, because they're going to charge them more, and but they're going to monitor them more because they know there's a higher risk attached to those persons. And then there are other people who only want the blue chip